Yeah.
Only at weekends.
Can I just say things have gone rather badly for you over the last few years.
Much for coming to this Centre for Social Justice meeting this morning. We'll get underway, and I'm delighted in a way that we have so many people here showing the interest in the subject, but I'm sorry to those of you who perhaps slightly uncomfortably stood at the margins, and I hope that will be stimulating enough to keep you focused. I'm going to be very strict, Chairman. My name's Tim Montgomerie, by the way, co-founder of the Centre for Social Justice, although it says I'm Esther McVey in front of me, so I'll swap that over. Not quite as attractive as Esther. And what I'm going to try and keep the panel moving along quite quickly. I'm going to ask them to get closer to 3 rather than 5 minutes. And what I'll do is won't introduce everyone at length because I think you know who people are. And we're going to start off with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, who we're really thrilled to have with us, Mel Stride, despite the fact he recently stole our head of policy. He's done a very good job in really helping to fulfil the universal credit revolution that Iain Duncan Smith began with the introduction of universal support, which we at the CSJ are really grateful for, Mel. But your 3 minutes begins now.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Tim, and thank you everybody for coming. This is indeed a very good sign that welfare reform matters. It's been going on for a very long time. Iain here did some brilliant work some years ago with universal support, making work pay. But we have new challenges today, and economic inactivity is first and foremost. That is people who are out of work and not looking for work. There are over 8 million of them in the UK. Internationally, actually, we are doing better than most other countries, though you wouldn't think that was the case from the headlines, but we are, but we have more to do, particularly because during the pandemic the numbers spiked quite dramatically by about 630,000 and have yet to come back down to trend. So if we look at breaking down those groups of those who are economically inactive, we have those who have caring responsibilities, which is why the Chancellor made announcements around childcare reform, better funding for that, getting away from that barrier there is funding the first month that UC claimants typically have. We've done a lot of work for the over 50s who have retired early, so that's midlife MOTs, to ask that critical question, have you really got enough finance in the tank to get you through comfortably to the end of your life? And we've seen a lot of progress in the numbers coming down there. The most difficult challenge, as we all know, is the long-term sick and disabled. Now, that is a group of 2.6 million people on those benefits. They are not subject to conditionality, so there's nothing that we do with that group. Yet we know, firstly, that 20% of them would like to do at least some work if they were given sufficient support. And we also know that work is good for the individual. It's good for mental health recovery, as well as being good for the labour market and for the economy more generally. So what are we doing? The first thing is we're fundamentally reforming the work capability assessment. In fact, in a few years' time, that will be removed altogether, at a stroke taking away the disincentive there is amongst that group to come off those benefits for fear that if working doesn't work out, they won't be able to get back onto them. So that's a fundamental structural change. But in the meantime, we're reforming the gateway onto those benefits through the work capability assessment descriptors to reflect the modern way of working from home. There are things that people that have, for example, have mobility problems at the moment may now be able to do in the way that they couldn't do a decade ago when those descriptors were last considered. So that is a big change which is coming down the line. I also think a couple of other points. Occupational health. We've got to choke off the flow into that benefit stock. And that flow is about 400,000 people a year, 100,000 of whom are coming out of work, going on a health journey into that 2.6 million. And occupational health will be part of getting in early and resolving the problems right at the start of that journey before people get too distant from the labour market. The last point I will make, Tim, because I know you'll be watching your your watch.
I already am.
You already are, exactly. Will be fit notes, right? So if you end up in that 2.6 million category, untouched by the state, only 1% of people coming out of that group every month, okay? You start by going into your GP. They give you on average 7 minutes. They have a fit note where 93% of the time they will sign you off as being unfit for any work whatsoever. A medical practitioner has therefore said you cannot work. The other box, which is that under certain circumstances with adjustments you might be able to do something, only gets ticked 6% of the time. I want to change that. I want to change it such that the person that goes in, who can be helped there and then, goes into an arrangement where health support plus work coach support is brought together at that moment in time to make sure that they don't proceed along that path. And that's why we've got things like Work Well that we're rolling out, universal support and all sorts of other things. I wish I could talk for about an hour, but I can't. But that, I think, hopefully sets out the kind of main parameters that we're looking at as a government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right, can I suggest from now on we only clap at the end, because I'm going to really keep everything on time. But Mel, you're going to be the only person who gets applause.
The guy at the end is
just
the guy at the end isn't allowed, no either. So Sue Ping-Chang is the economics editor of the Daily Telegraph. Sue, can you talk next and give us a bit of challenge? Where's the government still got to go on all of this
Sure,
stuff?
I'm not going to stand and just to follow Mel Stride's Tom speech. So, but one thing I do agree with is that we do need to start from a point where work is good for you. I think it was Voltaire, the French philosopher, who said, boredom saves us, saves us from three great evils: boredom, vice, and need. And I think that message of work being good for you, something to do, something worthy work, as Matthew Taylor said in his review for this government as well. And I think we failed in that respect, and this statistic that was actually brought to my attention by the Centre for Social Justice, that around 2.6 million people have no work requirements. It's actually more than that, but the wider statistics also includes people with long-term health conditions that will probably never work. And one thing that we also do need to remember is that we need to have compassion. We're not expecting everyone to go into work, but there are 500,000 people who say they want to work, and I think there should be more help for those people, because at the end of the day it is taxpayers who are footing the bill for this growing number of people who are claiming incapacity benefits, and this bill is rising. It's tens of billions of pounds a year. And a couple of points. So the reason why I take an interest in long-term inactivity was I had a breakfast roundtable with Karen Ward. So she advises. She's one of the people who advises the Chancellor. She's one of the economists there, and she brought a really alarming statistic to light. So there's a survey by the City and Guilds Association, and they interviewed 5,000 18 to 24-year-olds, and one in 10 of them said they never intended to find work, which I thought was a shocking statistic. And I don't know where the roots of that from, but a lot of things, there's a lot of attention about people who are 50 and over and the long-term health conditions that they're facing, mainly musculoskeletal, and also a lot of them who have retired. But there's also a lot of young people who are increasingly suffering from mental health conditions. How that's reported, how that's assessed is really important. And what I have been looking at recently is the rise in inactivity among young men, especially it's actually doubled since the early 1990s, and that's even taking into account the fact that more people are going to university, staying in education longer. And actually, if you're not in education, the proportion of workless men between 18 to 24 is actually more than the share of young women who traditionally, you think about teenage pregnancies and single mums. So I think that is one area that needs to be focused on. At the end of I do think, it is a challenge, and you talked about Secretary of State, some of the reforms that you're introducing, but in terms of, you want to reform the work capability assessment that assesses whether people are fit for work or not. That's not going to bed down until at least the next Parliament. And as we've been hearing in the corridors, you know, we don't know who's going to be the next government and who will be elected next year. But these reforms will take years to bed down. And even as your own white paper admits, these reforms that you want to introduce will only come into full effect in 2029. That's years away, and that's, you know, years of more people, if these trends continue, claiming benefits. And as we know, the longer that people stay out of work, the harder it is for them to find a job. I'll end it there.
Thank you. Mel, do you want to respond just briefly?
Yeah, very quickly. So, point of accuracy: 2026, not 2029, as to when they come in.
2026,
It does.
but 2029 to fully bed.
It starts in 2026, but look, the point is about welfare reform is I think you need courage, you need compassion, and you need time to do it and get it right. Now, Iain brilliantly started the ball rolling on universal credit. That was over 10 years ago, and we've still got a couple of million people to get through the system to migrate onto universal credit. These things take a lot of time. So you've got to have the right systems, you've got to have the right people in place, you've got to get the legislation through to actually bring it into force, and it does take time. And I think the most important thing is to get it right. We're in a very, very sensitive area, and the last thing we want to do is to end up in a position where we do something that goes off half-cocked and we end up having to row back. So I'm absolutely determined that this is going to be something that lasts and works, and we're going to do properly.
Thank you, and thank you, Sue, for your contribution. Harry Quilter-Pinner is the head of research at the Institute for Public Policy Research, which we enjoy working with at the CSJ. Harry.
Thank you. And firstly, let me say thanks to the CSJ for hosting today. We're hosting a very similar one next week in Liverpool, and I think it's really important that we have, yes, differences between political parties, but that we can have a really healthy debate and a discussion, and so I'm delighted to be here today. I want to start by just recognising the elephant in the room, which is the polls and the challenge that the Conservative Party faces over the next 16 months. And at the heart of that challenge is a very simple question that you guys have to answer and that the public will be asking, which is, how is my life better as a result of 13, what will be 15 years of Conservative government? And I think obviously because of so much of the disruption in the last few years, that's a harder answer to give than it would have been had we not had COVID, had we not had some of the political disruptions of recent times. But I think, and this brings us to our topic today, the employment story is potentially one of those areas which could be at the heart of an answer to that. And that's because employment rates have been going up steadily over that period, and unemployment, bar the COVID period, has gone down. So there is a positive story to be told here, and reforms, including UC, which CSJ have been great in championing in Duncan Smith in government, has been championing, is at the heart of that. And I think the challenge now is to lock in some of those gains in the face of some less flattering trends that are starting to emerge. And the obvious one here is the inactivity rate. But I would also say low pay, low productivity work is another big challenge. And what I was hoping to see from this conference, and what I think people will be hoping to see in the next year as we lead up to the election, is a really clear story about how the Conservatives can deliver that. And I wanted to just point to two areas where I think the Conservatives should be focusing. The first, and I have to mention it because it's been in the news, is the sanctions debate that we've been having in the last day or two. And I think it's worth being really clear that from the evidence, I don't think that is the solution to the inactivity problem. And the reason is it misdiagnoses the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is not a lack of motivation by most people to work. The problem is a lack of support to enable them to get into work. So if the big challenge is health, the solution to that is investment in support for people with long COVID, mental health, etc. The universal support offer that CSJ has been championing and that has been started to be introduced but needs doubling down on in my view. Mm-hmm. The same on if you're a single mother with 3 children, the barrier is childcare. And again, there's a positive story to be told because the government have championed childcare, but that needs to be doubled down on. And so I think really focusing on what is it that's causing the inactivity problem and what are the Conservatives doing to solve those problems. Sanctions are not going to cut it. And the evidence suggests that they don't do a huge amount for driving employment when the problem is something different. And the second thing that I wanted to mention, and then I'll stop because my time's almost up, is UC generosity. UC has been a huge innovation, and I think although it had a very bumpy start to life, the pandemic showed why it was such a great innovation and has delivered really well. But I think I've heard Andy say it in the back, and I think I've heard Iain say it as well. The problem with UC is not the car, there's not enough fuel in the engine.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to revisit that. There's already murmurs that there will be more cuts to welfare at the spending review. In my view, that would be an absolutely grave mistake. UC can be something of a legacy, something that the Conservatives can point to and say, we did this and it's improved the country. But there's a grave danger from not just doing damage to people, but doing damage to that legacy. And so I would say we should be looking at putting more money into UC rather than taking money out. And I think that's the heart of the overall pitch that the Conservatives should be taking to the next general election, which is, to quote one of your former Prime Ministers, not the nasty party, but the party of social justice. And CSJ have been a great champion of that cause over the years, and I hope that the Conservatives listen to them.
And also, I hope Labour listens to the Centre for Social Justice as well. Just Iain,
do I.
Iain has reminded me that we've got a full programme as an organisation at the Labour Party conference next week as well. How many meetings in total, Andy, have we got?
Lots.
7 or 8. And so anyone who's in Liverpool next week, please come see us there too. Mel, you want to come back on what? About sanctions?
Very quickly on sanctions. So look, it's not an either or. Sanctions aren't the thing that will drive loads and loads of extra people into employment. And the support part that Harry mentions is absolutely essential, which is why we are rolling out something called universal support, which is that we take those who've been away from the labour market for some considerable time, we find them jobs, we place them in employment, we put the wraparound training and support, we give them a life coach that will be with them for a period of up to a year to make sure they don't fall out of that kind of work. So there's a huge amount of money and investment and time and effort that's going into exactly that. On the sanctions point and whether they work or not, there's a lot of research around that's flawed on this, in my opinion, and I've looked very carefully at it. And there are two reasons for that. Firstly, often the comparison is made with what were the outcomes for those that were sanctioned compared with a control group that weren't. Well, the characteristics of those people that were sanctioned are very different from those that were not sanctioned, and they're less likely, intuitively one would think, to be equipped to find employment if they weren't able, for example, to turn up for a work coach interview 1 week after the next, which is 97% of the reason why most of them are sanctioned in the first place. And the second thing is that research totally neglects the deterrent effect that sanctions have. So it has an effect on those that are not sanctioned as well as those that are sanctioned. And I think the final point I would make is that it's a point of fairness. I think there is a contract between the state and the claimant, and that is that if you cannot work and you are sick and you are disabled, we are here to support you, and that's why we are compassionate Conservatives. But at the end of the day, if you're not prepared to engage, if you're not prepared to put in that effort, then I think sanctions are an acceptable approach, subject to the usual appeals processes that we have.
Thank you. Esther McVey.
Thank you very much. Back to work, Britain. I remember, I'll take you back a few years when I was a candidate in about 2007, and I hadn't quite become an MP then. And I met Iain Duncan Smith, who was working on this new scheme. How did we get benefits to work? How did we get people into work? And what was it Conservatives believe in? And that is extending opportunities to all. And how do we get a benefit system that does that? And who would have believed it? I became an MP in 2010, and then I moved into the DWP and stayed there from 2012 right the way through to about 2019. But what was it about? It was about making sure that work pays. People need to know that work pays, and that's really important. And the other thing, when you're getting a benefit, when you're getting money from other taxpayers, we used to say, you're now in a job to get a job. View that money that you're getting from the state, you're in a job to get a job. And Iain brought in a visionary way, brought in a raft of tailor-made support, whatever that was. There were various people at various, should we say, stages or on a journey into work. And you could be quite a way away from the workplace. How do we get you into work? What do we do? And there was a whole raft and a whole rate. To the point that after working in DW, I think it was about 2014, there were record numbers of people getting into work. 1,000 more people each and every day were getting into work because work was paying. We were giving people the training that they needed, the support they needed, and that was working. The reality was, it was all working perfectly fine until lockdown. And what did we do in lockdown and COVID? We basically closed down the country. People stayed at home. There was 2 years pretty much of people staying at home, and the fallout from that has been significant in many ways. So what happened there? People weren't having conditionality. Benefit was being given to people, and as I said, state closed things down. And what we have to do now is, and I do feel like we're going back to some of the things you did at the very beginning, Iain, and we're going to have to do the same again. We're going to have to be on that journey to get people back into work. And I think stopping the conditionality, stopping the sanctions, stopping all these things, stopping the support, stopping that one-to-one, those meetings to get people motivated into work. None of that was happening over lockdown, and that needs to recommence. And that is going to be a long journey. But I tell you one thing, it will be a Conservative government that does it, not a socialist one, because you need the compassion of conservatism, and you need the pragmatism of conservatism, and you need the belief in opportunities and hard work for all. That's what you're going to need. And Mel is starting that journey.
Excellent. You seem to have vigorous support of one former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions here, Mel. Let's hear what another former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has to say. Iain, the floor's yours.
Thanks very much indeed. It's sometimes a bit of like deja vu when we come back to this. Esther's absolutely right. The problem that's faced is the elephant in the room that we have to discuss is the effect of the lockdown and the closures. It wasn't just that people went home or whatever and it didn't work mostly, although lots of people did work. We seem to need to forget that those that worked were the least, the poorest in society, because they were doing stacking the shelves for all the middle class to order their books and things from Amazon. They were in trains, by the way, going to work in the morning in London. I know, tube trains that had been dropped to 1 an hour because the great mayor of London didn't want his drivers to be affected by COVID. What he failed to understand is those people who were on the lowest incomes going to stack the shelves needed to get to work. So I had photographs of trains absolutely jam-packed with people face to face, because he hadn't taken into consideration that his comfortable life was being served by those on the lower income scales. So this is the first bit. We need to remind ourselves that whatever we do, we have to think about the point, and Esther's right on this. The whole purpose of welfare reform is to make work pay, because we are in a competition. Everybody, Treasury for years and years and years took the view that it didn't matter about with tax credit was flawed for this reason, that it didn't matter because people only at the bottom had one choice to make, which was they had to go back to work. And I always maintain, no, people who are on low pay or out of work are exactly the same as really high-flying figures that can move from one business to the next. They will balance in their own mind the risk and reward of taking the next step. So if the risk is greater to go into work and the reward is less, then they're not stupid. They're going to move into a situation where they don't take that choice. So the combination in all of this is the risk and reward, and alongside that, the conditionality. So the two things I would say, and Mel's right, it's not an either or. You get one without the other, and you don't get fairness. So we introduced a thing called the claimant commitment. I wanted to call it the claimant contract, which is where they sit down with the job centre staff, and on one side of the paper is what the job centre staff says they must do to get themselves back into work. On the other side is a commitment by the department to do something for them to get them that access to work. So those two things are a commitment between the government and the individual. Now, if you don't want to have conditionality, and conditionality is by both parties always been part of the system, then you have to look at the American system. The American system doesn't have conditionality. Their job centres are separate from the benefit payments. So as a result of that, you've seen in America what they do is they do benefit limitations. So they introduced limits of payment. At first of all, it was, I think, 6 to 9 months on employment benefits. So if you went back and worked, you lost your benefit altogether. Later on, I think Obama extended it to 18 months, I think it was. But the reality is, when you look at that, this is a group of people that don't suddenly disappear. So where did they go? What you saw in America was all of the sickness benefit side of things exploded because they found a way across, and also their food stamp area exploded. They have a very peculiar system in America about supporting American farmers. Not a bad idea, but it's in the food stamps. But the point is those two benefits whacked straight up. So the thing you've got to understand about this is the point I've made endlessly, and I thought I'd won the battle with the Treasury, that human beings, no matter where they are in the pecking order of income and skills, make the same choice. They try and figure out what's best for them and their families, and they will make those choices that lead them to it. Let's take ESA, which is on the sickness benefit. The biggest issue right now is hang on a second. I spent 6 years doing this, so I'm going to give a few more minutes, don't worry. Because I want to come back to the main point.
Six and the rest.
And the rest, yeah. But the point I want to make here, therefore, is the key bit is what do you do with this block of people that came out of COVID, where all the conditionalities were removed, but at the same time, a lot of support wasn't moved. Now, two things that I blame the Treasury for. Not all the tax credit group are in universal credit. What is the point of having a benefit system that is all-encompassing and you leave still a group of people outside that benefit system, and that is only down to Treasury money? They should be moved across immediately into universal credit, because universal credit gives you an advisor, point that you made earlier on, with you the whole time. Tax credits, you never see anybody at all. So get them into universal credit, and it'll make Mel's life a lot easier. And the second group that was meant to be in there is the key group that we're talking about today, which is those who are on employment support allowance. We refer to it often as sickness benefit. Only about half of those, or maybe slightly more, are in universal credit. Again, if you're on ESA, nobody sees you unless you are in universal credit. So the point of universal credit is being, in a way, debauched by the fact that these groups are not in it to get the kind of support that Harry was referring to earlier on, which is exactly the point of universal credit. So get them in as a priority to make his life, Mel's life, easier. And the final point I want to make on all this, the problem is sickness benefit, ESA, was designed by the Labour Party towards the end of their time. It has never really worked. We had endless reviews of it. It's a peculiar and complex benefit. What I wanted to do was to get alongside, remember 60% of all those who go into sickness benefit now have mental health problems. And of those, 60% have depression or anxiety. Depression or anxiety can be treated quite reasonably by talking therapies. So what you want to do is on your GP thing, you need to have, and GPs are quite frightened about mental health issues. They really don't like diagnosing it. So that if you come in and say you've got a mental health problem, for the most part, they're going to tick that box and basically send you out of work. What you need is an immediate route to a mental health practitioner and an occupational therapist, and they will adjudge your condition, and at the same time, they'll look at how many hours you could do in work, and that can be taken back to the job centre, and the job centre then can work with you to find the hours that are necessary to keep you in work or get you into work so that your condition improves. Work is a health treatment, and the health department accepted that. So my point here is, if we're going to reform all of this and get people back to work, the final thing I would do, that 16-hour rule that says you can't work more than 16 hours if you're on benefit, once they're in UC, that no longer matters. Get rid of it, because it leads people to criminality almost immediately. If we think that they're not working, it's not true. They go into the black economy, they do cash-in-hand work, and they get abused over it. Get rid of the 16-hour rule, put all these people through UC, keep the advisor with them and say, we don't mind how many hours you work, we'll taper it away at a different rate so that you still stay in work until finally you're off the benefit system. That was what UC was designed for, and that's what universal support would help them do. So all of these can be done. I think they can be done reasonably quickly, but Treasury needs to invest the money, for your sake, in getting these reforms done. Because if these people aren't on UC, and there's a huge chunk of them that are not, then UC can't help them. And UC is the key to helping them. Every other country is looking at universal credit now. Why are we still stalled on its full application? It is the solution. Let's use it.
Good. Well, slightly over 3 minutes, but very good stuff. Yeah. Right, we're going to go to question now. We've got half an hour, which is why I wanted the panellists to be speedy, because we want to hear from you. And I'm going to give priority, first of all, to the people stood up, saying you have not had the comfort of a seat during this talk. So, gentlemen at the back. And now, if you can say your name and if you're from any relevant organisation, that would be great. Thank you.
Jerry from Durham University. I'm just wondering whether we'll ever see the PIP ever incorporated into the universal credits.
No.
Secretary of State, do you want to take that one?
Okay, so PIP is an unwork-related benefit, but where we will be looking at it will be in the context of that longer-term structural reform to the work capability assessment that I referred to earlier. So breaking that link between taking a risk when you leave the benefits that you can't get back on. PIP will become the new gateway that people will go on to instead of going through the WCA. So it is up for some longer-term reform. I think, incidentally, there are some issues around PIP in that it's a fairly blunt instrument because it is there to basically compensate you for the extra costs of disability, and yet what we know is that for some people it may mean a grab rail to get into the bath or an extra step to be able to reach the microwave, and yet the amount, of course, is relative to those kind of items really quite high, and the demand for PIP has been increasing quite dramatically recently. So there are some issues around PIP, but there are no immediate plans to reform PIP at this stage.
Yeah, I was going to say, bear in mind with PIP, it's outside because you can work and you don't have any taper to take away the benefit. Unlike sickness benefit, where you have to come off it, with PIP, it stays there as a floor, so that's what complicates things. It was based on the disability living allowance pressure.
The lady there on stood up. If you don't mind shouting, if we might, yeah.
So around 20 million people in the UK living with a musculoskeletal condition, and around 20% of people are out of work currently. One of the challenges with having arthritis or another MSK condition is that actually they often struggle for a diagnosis or to get access to the care and support they need to live well with the condition.
Yeah.
Really important that we're addressing. Many want to be working, but how can we better go upstream to support people to get the diagnosis they need to better prevent further decline so that people are able to stay in work and to avoid becoming economically inactive?
Who'd like to take that one?
Happy to go if you like. Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question. It gets right to the heart of the reforms that we're rolling out. We've got to get much better at getting in earlier, both with the support to stay in work or get in work, and it is both because some people have those conditions in work, some out of work. But we have to bring the healthcare, in this case, the kind of stuff that MSK requires, in at the same moment. And that's why if you have a look at Work Well, which is the programme that I'm running out at the moment, it does exactly that. So we've got to embed the employment, as Iain was describing, with the healthcare support, and I think that is the route. And the GP is central to that in terms of that part of the journey into that kind of reform system.
Okay, the gentleman there, and then I'll start going to the people sat down as well. So,
my name's Mike Wording. Oh, sorry. I've got a microphone. I'm Mike Wordingham from the Royal National Institute of Blind People, and I was just going to ask you a little bit about the Access to Work scheme, because we know that in June 2023 there were 23,000 people who had secured jobs who are waiting for the support they need. And can you give some talk a bit about how that needs to be resourced more effectively? So people in my team, for example, who are registered blind, who do get that support, it's completely life-changing. They're in work. It's all of the things you've been talking about. So with that kind of backlog, you need more resources to make sure that people are getting the support they need. And access to work is a bit of a best-kept secret within the DWP, and best kept secret for employers to know that it's available, so they're more likely to employ us as disabled people.
Yes, I don't want to hog all the questions, but I suppose it's one for me, yeah. So access to work, just so everybody's clear, is to help employers make adjustments such that they can employ people that have various disabilities. It's very successful, and it works very well when it's there. It's in monetary terms, the claim can be up to £67,000. So this is a huge, huge intervention. You are absolutely right that there has been a backlog. The department is working on it both in two ways. One is we're staffing up in that area, and secondly, we're looking at the systems and the efficiency there. And the numbers are coming down, but I want to see them coming down as quickly as possible. And I think you make a fair point about backlogs.
The lady at the back there in the blue shirt, I think. Wait for a microphone if you can. Yeah, that's great. And if you could stand just to project yourself, if you can, that would be great.
Sorry, I also have a laptop on my lap.
Don't worry if you can't.
Hi, yeah, I'm Alice from Think Ahead, a mental health workforce charity. I was interested in what you're saying about obviously the high number of people with mental ill health that are accessing sickness benefits, and I was just wondering what you think can be done to make sure that the process of accessing benefits doesn't worsen people's mental health.
Could I start with Harry on that one, please?
Firstly, it's great to Think Ahead here because IPPR helped set Think Ahead up, which is amazing. I just so on the question, I think one of the things that we find in all our research, and this is why coming back to the sanctions point, I think it's quite important. I agree, we're not arguing that there should be no sanctions, but what we are arguing is that often those sanctions don't work for solving the kind of problems you're talking about, the mental health issues you're talking about, and in particular, because the sanctions are determined largely at a local level by the job centre employees, it breaks that bond of trust between people using the service and the people that are there to support them. And the problem with that is that if you are vulnerable, whether that's a mental health issue, addiction, maybe you're facing abuse, maybe you've got skills problems, you're not going to confide some of those really difficult problems with someone who you fundamentally don't trust and you think might sanction you. And so my concern with sanctions is not that they exist. Obviously, in extreme, that is part of a fair welfare system. It's that the way in which we're using them, especially when they're encouraged to be used as a tool as they are at the moment, ends up breaking that trust. And we're using a hammer when we should be using to thread it instead of a needle to try and sort some of these problems. So I think we need to fundamentally change that relationship between job centre employees and those who are receiving support.
Esther.
I think when universal credit was brought through, it was very much trying to get that tailor-made benefit system. So you did have a work coach. So you're talking about this trust, you're talking about this person you could engage with on a regular basis who could support you. So you're quite right, there would always have been mitigating circumstances in one way or another. It could have been, I don't know, single mum, missed the bus and all of that. So of course sanctions would never have been used there. But again, the mental health issues, some of that could be about huge anxiety, and so it might need confidence to support somebody actually building up. So I think that work coach relationship is key. And I would again say, since lockdown, human beings are social beings, and we've seen a big rise in that. And I don't know whether it's anxiety, despondency, but yes, we're going to have to make sure that work coach relationship does work and you are helped into work rather than pushed further away from it. Yeah.
Sue?
I think it's also a question of resource. I mean, Mel mentioned a programme Working Well in Manchester, and I've looked into it, where there is a lot of intensive support for people to get back into work. But that costs money. That costs the taxpayer money. It costs time, and you need trained health professionals. So Iain talked about getting quick GP referrals so that people can be assessed and rightly or wrongly be put on benefits or put on better training programs or more support accordingly. But we need those mental health professionals, and you can't train these people overnight. So it is a question of resource and cost and finding the balance for that. I think there will be occupational health measures coming in the autumn statement that look to keep people in work, and I think there should be a focus on that, because as I said before, once people leave the labour market, become more detached from it, it's harder for them to then become re-engaged again.
Yeah, there is a solution to this, but it requires the government, any government, and I failed on this because I wanted to do this when I was there, and the government at the time didn't invest in it. Mental health condition has grown throughout the last 15 to 20 years as probably the single biggest reason why people are either falling out of work or unable to get into work. And as I said earlier on, the figures are quite interesting, that 60% now, but in the old days, when 30 years ago, it was back pain or whatever, long-term back pain or you said arthritis, these were the biggest reasons. They're not now. Musculoskeletal, we can deal with it because it's straightforward. Doctors can examine you, they can make a conditional check, and then they can tell you what your problem is, and from that we can extrapolate what to do. So most jobs advisors would be reasonably comfortable with this. There are some issues on long-term conditions, but by and large, those are very self-evident in a way, and they should be easier to spot. With mental health problems, it is a fact of life that GPs are scared stiff of talking about mental health. Some of them have a book in their drawer which has a whole lot of ticks about when you ask a few questions. What we need to do is GPs need to be backed up, and so this does need an investment in mental health practitioners. There's no question at all about it. I actually asked for us to be able to put practitioners into the job centres to sit there, so that somebody comes with a diagnosis of mental health, they go straight to the practitioner. And then the other bit of this is occupational health advisors. So the two should sit literally one next to the other. And what the occupational health practitioner would be able to say is, you have depression or anxiety, here's the kind of treatment we need, we'll get that sorted. The occupational health practitioner will say, well, with that situation, we think you can do 20 hours a week. So that goes back to the advisor, and the advisor now has a clear path of how to work with you to get these things done, bearing in mind that both work and treatment are treatments in themselves. So that is the key way to do this. We weren't able to do it before, but I say for Mel's sake, the Treasury's got to understand, if you invest in this and get these people back to work, the savings are way more than the initial cost. It's as simple as that. And also, their health condition improves, which makes them more likely to go up the hours, to do more work, and to become much better in their jobs. And keeping them in work is also part of the process. So GPs, that's why it's so urgent if someone is falling out of work with mental health problems, that they get this, so that you can say to the company, look, just keep them on 15 hours for a while we get this treatment done, and as they get better, they'll go back up the hours. Because if you fall onto sickness benefit, you're almost certainly going to stick around on that for most of the rest of your life, and you don't want that to happen. So that's the two bits I would do.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Very quickly, investment and money. In the last budget, £3.5 billion was made available by the Chancellor to get people back into work and address economic inactivity. £2 billion of that was to address exactly the issues that we are quite rightly raising on this panel. How do we get the new people in? How do we fund that? And so on and so forth. The second thing, in terms of support, Esther is absolutely right, and Iain is absolutely right. Get people into UC, get them into the environment where they are within our system and we can support them. So we not only support those who are actively looking for work and are not working, but also those that are in work, so we can get them to get the extra hours and progress within work. And what I've done since I've been Secretary of State is to roll something out called Additional Job Centre Support, which is an intensive period of a few weeks at the critical moments where we know if people stay beyond that on UC, they tend not to find a job. So we're absolutely committed to get that relationship between the work coach and the claimant right, and as much as we can of it.
Okay, lady in the front here, just wait for a microphone, please.
Thank you. Naomi Clayton from Learning and Work Institute. We know from the data that around 1.7 million people who are economically inactive say that they want to work, yet that we estimate that just 1 in 10 disabled people or older people are getting support to find work each year. What do the panel think about how we widen access to employment support, perhaps by working with trusted institutions like housing associations, local authorities, adult education services that can engage with these people?
Sue, do you want to go first on that, if I could put you on the spot?
Yeah, one of the striking statistics, I think it's from the Institute for Employment Studies, is that we have one of the least utilised job centres in Europe, as it were. You know, you see them on the high streets, but unless you claim a certain type of benefits, that if you walk in, for example, that they won't be able to help you. So I think taxpayers' money needs to be, put in mind with all this. But I think there needs to be support for active labour market policies, whether it's, help with CV. I mean, my mum is a classic example. So she was a nurse for decades, used to be in scrubs, and she gave up work mainly to look after me, but then she changed career and she started a career in admin. But one of the things I was talking to her about this just a couple of days ago, and she said, what do I wear to an interview? She was used to wearing scrubs in the theatre all day, and she didn't know, how do I write a CV? I hadn't done one. So it's that sort of support, and it might not come directly from the job centre, but we need to think about these active labour market policies that think about getting people into work, and just, instead of these sort of passive ones where you just pay people to sort of keep up with their living standards, etc.
Harry.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on your question, but also some other comments that were made to say that, including Iain just a second ago, which is I still think there's quite a big job to do to make employment services a really key part of our public service armoury, and to make it a service that feels aspirational and forward-looking. I think there's still quite a lot of stigma around employment services. It's still a service that people mainly think is for when things go wrong, rather than something that supports them throughout their life and could support anyone. And I think there's a lot of work to, I think the idea of having more mental health support in job centres, trying to bring more of those services together so it is genuinely a place of wraparound support, rather than one which comes with connotations of failure or fear. And I think we still haven't quite got that right. And I think that's the job that we need to do now.
We definitely, when I was there and Iain was there, were making job centre pluses a centre where you could go in, it like a work hub, to make sure that it wasn't about benefits. It was actually a place where you could get work, that local employers could come in and meet people in the local environment there. And that's a key, and that CV writing was done there. Find a boss that you might want to work with. During lockdown, that went online, and there was a greater reach out to meeting people there. But I think, again, since lockdown and people coming out, that does need to be wound back up again and get more people there. Mel probably tell you more on that. And the one thing I always wanted was more reach out. So actually going into the communities where people needed that extra support, which would get people who were older, it would get people with disabilities, it would get those further from the workplace. And again, with less money, they're not wanting to pay for the transport either way, but you would go out and work with them. And a lot of that was happening. And I will also say, Iain and my good self came up with a scheme which has worked very well, called Disability Confident. So this was about, is an employer confident to employ somebody with disabilities? What can you do? Access to work, whatever it is that we need to do that. And then that was with trusted institutions, and what extra support needs to be put in place. I think, again, some of these, but Mel is closer to it than I am, who can say, some of those might need to be revved up, but they might already be revving at the moment.
Yes, that's right.
Are either of you itching to come in?
Can I just... I'd like to say something.
Okay, go on.
Do you want to go? Yeah, can I just quickly... You've got all the data about what you're doing. I just want to say about this, it's important that we understand what happens. I mean, the truth is that when I was there, we did a trial in putting job centre key staff, the ones that look around the community for where the jobs are, what the businesses were. We actually put them into some schools instead of the so-called career advisors for about 6 months. And the results were really quite interesting, because what I asked them to do, and this was agreed by the school, was to go in, talk to the 13 and 14-year-olds about what kind of employment they could expect here if they leave school at 16 with no qualifications, what they could expect with key qualifications, and then what the prospects were if they went on. And the thing is, because they were talking about what was available in the community, it wasn't some great pipe dream. And the teachers are by and large very bad at that. It's not something that they naturally do, because many of them have been teaching since the beginning, and understanding other work doesn't help. But these guys, they all knew exactly what the kind of work was available within the main city. And what we found was, first of all, 13 and 14-year-olds then got the idea that what was education really all about for them, if they wanted to leave at 16, was there was some purpose in getting some of these qualifications. And the second thing was, it gave them a picture of what the motivation was of the kind of people that they're going to pick up when they hit 18. And so the key thing was that if you didn't get somebody into work after 16, if they left school, then they had this work scar on their back by the time they were 18, and much more difficult to get back into work. So these, and Esther's right, these are areas that Job Centre can do, but you need the schools and others, and areas that older people work in the communities to cooperate, because they're positive message they send them, and they help them do that. And there's lots they could do, because they are full of lots of advice. And by the way, universal support was meant to encompass all of this, so that universal support was part of universal credit. It never got implemented, And the work programme you talked about up in Manchester here is universal support, because Andy came down and asked us how to do it, and we told him how to do it, and it's successful, but it needs investing in. So
we're rolling it out.
Exactly right.
We're rolling it out, and you're absolutely right. Very quickly, Tim. So on disability employment, the record is pretty good overall. The disability employment gap has been coming down through time. It has ticked up a little bit more recently, but it's generally been coming down. We set ourselves a target in 2017 of 1 million more disabled people in employment, a 10-year target. 5 years in, 2022, last year, we'd reached 1.7 million more disabled people in employment, and I think that is a terrific record. Esther mentioned disability confidence. She's quite right. That's a huge part of making employers comfortable and positive about employing disabled people. We've mentioned access to work. We have disability employment advisors in our job centres, and partnering, which I think Naomi mentioned. Absolutely, Thrive Into Work, Andy Street, Birmingham. It's brilliant. It brings together exactly the way we've been discussing this mental health support and other support, plus the work coach. The final thing I was going to say is just bear in mind that we're not always talking about, when we're talking about giving support to those who are unemployed and not in work, but for those that are working small numbers of hours. And there we brought more and more people into conditionality through time. So it used to be at the minimum living wage, 12 hours of work, and after 12 hours you were left alone by us. We then put it up to 15. We've now just put it up to 18. And even for those over 18 hours of work, we're now looking at bringing conditionality and support into that group as well. So there are hundreds of thousands more people getting support now than there would have been several years ago.
Gentleman at the back there stood up. Yeah, thank you.
Chris Smythe from The Times. I just want to pick up on the point about mental health and ask people why they think the numbers have gone up so dramatically. What is going on there, and how much of this is this a threat versus perhaps an opportunity, given many of these conditions are potentially reversible, and also how that links to the way in which we talk about some of these problems. I think it's quite striking, Mel, that you've avoided the sort of tough language of shirkers and skivers that perhaps has been used in this area in the past, although we have had obviously some harder edge rhetoric about conditionality at this conference. How much of the way in which, how should we talk about this, and how much does that influence the way in which people, particularly with mental health conditions, interact with the benefit system?
Now, do you want to go straight?
Yeah, very quickly. Chris, well, good to see you, because I think you joined me actually up in Sheffield, was it? We went to look at a project up there, yeah. So let me just touch on this point about tough language, because I think you're very right to raise it. I said earlier, I think welfare reform needs courage, and the second word I used was compassion. And the third was you need time as well, okay. And I think it's unhelpful generally to frame the debate in terms of attacking people and so on and so forth. If you get the reform right, all of that will be taken care of, and that's what we're going to do. In terms of mental health, the big surge in long-term sickness growth is mental health, MSK, and a trailing in third place is cardiovascular. But mental health is the big one, particularly, as Iain has set out, amongst younger people. I suspect there are at least three things going on there. One is COVID was very bad for young people's mental health. In particular, these are people that want to socialise, build networks. It's part of growing up, and that was denied for them at a critical point of their growing up. The second thing I think is socialisation, as I would term it, of mental health, labelling. That good thing that we talk about mental health, good thing that we let it all hang out there and people get treatment that wouldn't have in the past, but question mark, to what degree are we too readily identifying individuals as being, and then consequentially doing various things as a result of that? To what extent are we leaning too hard into some of that stuff? It's a question mark in my mind. And the third thing is social media. So I've got two daughters, aged 15 and 12. Okay, they don't have a childhood like I had, where I would go home from school having had my punch-ups with my mates or whatever, and read a book or watch some telly if my parents would let me. They go home with a phone in their pocket, and they might be in their bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, connected to these people, and there's something that's kicked off, and it's very stressful, and so on and so forth. They're never away from that. And I think that's probably a very large component of it.
Just one quick comment. I agree with Mel on this, that you can do it one, two. The job centres and the Department of Work and Pensions can't cure the ill, which is causing this increase. But what they can do is resolve it quickly as they can, and the points we made are right. But we need also to ask ourselves a question about what has happened about life for young people now that is causing them to be in this particular problem. We've got record levels of family breakdown and dysfunction now in the UK, probably leading the Western world in this. Tell me that that isn't a significant problem for kids' instability in their life. And the second, I agree completely with the whole point about the online safety bill, which makes it absolutely vital that we do something, is none of my generation, or many generations until quite recently, have been under this cosh and pressure that social media bring on people's lives. They're called a ghastly attacks that some kids get, the bullying that takes place on the internet. We really have to understand there has to be some disciplines and rules in families set around the usage of this stuff, because it is causing such mayhem and a lot of depression and anxiety very early on for kids that takes them straight out of the jobs market even as they leave school. So these are really important questions that are not for the DWP, but government has to ask the question and start the debate. What are we doing to our children through our family dysfunction and breakdown? And the usage of social media is a really big deal, I'm afraid.
Very, very powerful. Right, we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask that lady there in the yellow top, the gentleman there I said could speak, and then I'm going to ask all the panellists just to say a final 1 minute sort of remark. So, and then we'll have to end. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to get everyone in.
Hi, my name is Nadine Batchelor-Hunt from Politics Home. It's just a quick one on productivity and economic inactivity. In the drive to reduce economic inactivity, there's been concerns from experts that it could lead to pushing people into jobs they're overqualified for, and then in the long term actually damage productivity. So I was just wondering how concerned the government is about this and what they're doing to avoid that, because things like sanctions could end up pushing somebody to a job if they've got a degree into something that's not as highly skilled. Thanks.
And anyone who doesn't subscribe or read Politics Home, it's a brilliant website. Gentleman there.
Hi, my name's Philip Inman from the Observer.
Could everyone?
Guardian. Can you all hear me?
I think you wait for a microphone, I'm sorry.
Hi, Philip Inman from the Observer. I also write for the Guardian. I was interested, all the panellists mentioned therapists and occupational therapists. Where do you think these people are going to come from? Mel, could you tell us a bit more about the 2 billion you say that you've got for support out of the 3.5, how much of that is for therapists and occupational therapists? And maybe you need to sanction your daughters with their mobile phones as well as benefit claimants.
Good. Okay, we'll take, I think we'll go in reverse order, I think. So, Iain, do you want to start?
Yeah, I don't buy the overqualified for jobs. The fact is, if you are in receipt of welfare, the most important thing is to get you into work. Your qualifications, your skills, your motivation then take you from there. But if you're out of work, sitting there thinking, I'm looking for the big job, then that is the attitude that you have to kind of break down. You have to take the work, because that takes you away from the welfare system and into a prospect. Work develops, your attitude develops. These are important factors. So the idea that somehow I know that I could be doing other jobs is fine, but if you are receiving support from the government to get back into work, you need to get the work that's available. And if you've got the right qualifications or whatever, then companies will take you on. The key thing is get into work is absolutely vital. It's the number one lesson I think we learn all the time. If you pitch around for ages and ages, you get out of the work habit, it becomes very depressing. More likely to suffer from mental health problems out of work than you are in work. That's the key. Second point on occupational therapists, the point I made about occupational therapists is the health department has got to train more. There has got to be more investment in occupational therapy. Where do they come from? They come from people going into the job because there's a job there to be done, and there's a training course for it as well, which is important. I just believe that for years on all governments we just haven't understood what was coming next with mental health issues. So, we invest in all sorts of doctors and nurses doing things, but what we don't do, and this is the point about GPs, is they are really worried about mental health because they don't really understand it properly. They can diagnose your musculoskeletal problems, tomorrow your heart disease problems, but when you ask them, I've got depression or anxiety, they sit and stare at you and go, right, okay, well, let's get you away from here and put you on benefits or whatever. So the point is, getting that is really important. We did have a plan to do that at the time, where they would go to occupational health and mental health practitioners, work out what it was, but we just didn't get the investment. That investment's required because it needs training. I couldn't agree with you more.
Esther.
Are we doing the summation?
Final remarks.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Then I guess I would go back to some of my opening comments that we need to make sure that work pays so that people go to work. I think people need to understand, the importance of work, about self-esteem, about finding your place in society, about fulfilling your potential in life. And also remember the opportunities from work. Most people will find their partner there, have their friends there. It opens up the gateway to the enjoyment of the rest of your life. And then have a system that is nimble, that is sensitive, that is with the ability to coach and bring you into that workspace. And Universal Credit did that. And we now need to make sure that universal support is there. And it must adapt to the situation around it. And that now adaptation is into that mental health space, which will need extra support and guidance for people. And we need to have a working, active, productive country. And I think that's all we want. That's what we all need.
Harry.
I wanted to make 2 points. One on the question on presenteeism and the economy. Because I disagree with Iain slightly that I think there is a big problem here. And it came through really clearly in all of our work with people who are using the service. There's one quote here: "It almost felt like I was in a jobs machine where they would just churn out jobs they thought I could apply for, even though I have an area of expertise which they disregarded." Now, clearly, if you take that to extreme and people are trying to be a rocket scientist when they don't have the qualifications, there's a problem. But by and large, a system that completely disregards people's skills and people's aspirations is going to fail. And it's going to fail not just the people, but also our economy. So businesses also said, we're getting all these applications from people in job centres because they're being forced to. They're completely unqualified for the jobs, or it's not right for them. It's a waste of everyone's time. So I think we do need to think about that, particularly in an economy that will be transitioning. The climate transition, automation, we need job centres to be helping people to skill up and go into jobs where we know there is high productivity, high pay jobs. Final comment, we haven't talked much about the generosity problem. It is a huge issue. 2 ideas that IPPR put out today. One is, do we need a similar mechanism, a bit like the triple lock or the double lock, for pensions, for working age benefits, to ensure that it's keeping up with inflation and with pay? Secondly, do we need a similar institution like the Low Pay Commission to help politicians hold them accountable for increasing the generosity of UC? Because at the moment it falls far below the essentials, not some aspirational income, but the essentials.
Thank you, Harry. Sue.
I think the simple message is there's a lot to play for here. I think it was Mel, yourself, who said that if we get all the people back who left the workforce during the pandemic, it would generate enough tax revenues to cut a penny or 2 pence off income tax. So there is a lot to play for, but these are long-term challenges, and they will take many years to bed down. I think it was the Office for Budget Responsibility that said, every person who is out of work, they estimate it's £5,000 a year in foregone tax or national insurance payments, and a lot of these people are young people, again suffering from mental health conditions mostly. So help is needed at that end of the spectrum for people who are starting their careers, to make sure that they do get into work and they stay there.
And Mel.
Thank you, Tim. So very quickly on the 2 questions we were asked on productivity. So the government's doing a lot to encourage innovation, to encourage business investment, to build infrastructure and so on, to drive that. The bit within the labour market where you get the productivity is not so much actually getting people into work, that just increases the size of the workforce. It's upskilling people and getting them into better, higher value added jobs. And as I described earlier, we are helping people who are in work do exactly that. Yeah. The second thing is Philip's very legitimate question about, show us where's the beef, where's the money, all this money you're talking about. The OBR, Economic, Fiscal and Outlook, is the document to go and look at the lines on universal support, work well and so on. All the money is set out exactly there. And as to my daughters, I think if I go to them and say that even the man from The Guardian says you should be I think they will quake in their boots, and I'll try it tonight. But look, can I just finish by, I think I've probably said everything that I want to send. We've got this message across about how particularly long-term sick and disability, we've got to bring together health and work right at the centre of everything, because work is good for you, as Esther has eloquently set out. Work is the provider of so much for the individual, for society, for the economy, for funding the public services, and the hallmark of a civilised society. And that's what we're absolutely determined to press forward with with vigour. Thank you very much, and thank you for the discussion. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Well, I'm going to apologise to all the panellists because I've been hurrying and chasing them along for the whole hour, but I hope you agree it's meant we've had a rich time together. We've got lots of content, lots of answers, and I personally have learned quite a lot, an awful lot. And can we now? You now have permission to clap the panellists.
Well done, very good. Yes, I'd love to.
If you, there's another meeting.
I'd love to be.
Yeah, no,
I know
you're
you're
great.
very, well, you're very informed and you're very
Yeah, no,
innovative.
I am.